Time.
All right. So thanks, Doug, for joining us again today. We're really curious about what's going on at Venice Beach, and I've seen you are getting immersed in the coverage about what's going on down there. So I know that Sheriff Villanueva is, there's some special enforcement going on. Let's start there. What is the current state of Venice Beach? Maybe let's start with the background on like what's gone on over the pandemic and why the situation is different than previous levels of homelessness in Venice Beach.
So yeah, you make a good point that over the years or over the decades, really, Venice has from time to time become a location where people would just go to hang out for the obvious reasons that it was a beautiful environment and the community had this sort of bohemian background of beat poets and hippies and counterculture, and it was a very relaxed, tolerant place. Um, Recently, of course, Venice has been changing with the arrival of high-tech firms, Google, Snapchat, and just a general increase in property values along the beach. There have been a lot of tear downs and new like beautiful modern architecture mansions that are in the multi-million dollar range, and so this added this new layer onto the background of Venice, and of course Venice itself is a community of of tens of thousands of people. I think the population is something like 40, but all of this is occurring in this very narrow part of it between Highway 1 and the beach. And so it's a very concentrated environment with densely populated and with these different social groups just all mixed up together. And now, if you've been on Rose Avenue recently, it's like Melrose. It's just lined with these kind of hip outdoor dining restaurants, and so you have all of these different cultures just packed together. And then with the general rise in homelessness in Los Angeles, the Mayor Garcetti created this a bridge home program where he opened shelters in every council district. And the one in Venice turned out to be very traumatic in that a group of Venice residents protested it very loudly for the reasons that it was near a school, and they were worried that it was going to cause an increase in crime and cause homeless people to sort of congregate around it. And Councilman Bonin and Mayor Garcetti assured people that that wouldn't be the case. There would be special enforcement zone, and it would actually improve the community. Well, then, like days after it opened, the pandemic hit, and the shelter had to cut its capacity in half, and the enforcement came to an abrupt end, and the worst predictions came true. The camps just swelled around it, crime increased, and
Where
it,
is
it,
this?
this is not on the beach. It's like 2 blocks away from the beach. You have to just sort of picture how concentrated everything is. You have
Yeah.
the boardwalk, and then 2 blocks away is Main Street, and this shelter was on Main Street, about 2 blocks down, and then in between the shelter and Rose Avenue, you've got a commercial block where Google's headquarters is, and that block is now lined with RVs that just never move because it's a commercial zone and the RVs can park there. So then you have the boardwalk, which during the pandemic, the camps along the boardwalk just swelled to a couple of hundred tents. And there's just a lot of tension with, I mean, and again, the boardwalk is this narrow space where you have businesses and residences on one side, this narrow boardwalk, and then on the other side, you have now what's now a row of tents that goes for about a mile.
And so, as you're seeing the rise in tents, has there and I've been seeing this on social media, and it definitely seems to have swelled the like outpouring of either side demanding action. Is there a tangible rise in criminal activity? Because I've seen it portrayed as this
Yeah.
like hellscape. Like,
Yeah. There's definitely a rise. It's documented by LAPD crime statistics, which I analyzed, and I didn't look at 2021, but the Pacific Division has put out stats showing that the increase was even greater in 2021. And it's, again, most crime you don't see. You read about it, or you can look at the annual statistics and see an increase or decrease. But this crime in Venice is just on public display. And when we've walked around on the boardwalk, and if you're there long enough, you see a fight break out. You see somebody beat somebody else up, and because so many people live so close to it, and these are sophisticated people, they've started videoing, and essentially somebody posts a video every day of some violent occurrence along the boardwalk or on Main Street. And that would include fires with tents burning up. It would include people attacking tourists, attacking just other people who are just walking down the street or bicycling, or people homeless people being attacked by other people. It's just become almost a daily occurrence.
so now that we cut to kind of post pandemic, and I think that's where all of this like is now where we're now at, right? It's the boardwalk is reopening, tourists are starting to come back to the city, potentially, especially around July 4th. What is the city doing now, and what is going to happen next to these individuals on the boardwalk?
So Councilman Bonin has declared in an interview with us that the condition of the boardwalk is unacceptable, and that the camping on the park, which is begins just at the edge of the boardwalk and goes out into the beach. It's a city park, and it's against the law to camp in a city park. So he said that that's going to end, but he hasn't given a timeline, and he's predicated it on the provision that everybody there will be provided a better alternative. And he's at the moment that better alternative doesn't exist, but the shelter is resuming its greater capacity, and the city has purchased a Ramada Inn that's going to be used as a Project Home Key, and Bonin has made an agreement with a group called Share that provides shared housing that they'll take up to 100 people. And so when this will start to occur is unknown, but all indications are that that something will be occurring by July.
So, so I guess, I have monitored this obviously, but there's a lot of tension between residents and the local officials. Can you tell me a little bit about what you see happening between the different parties? Because there's a lot of stakeholders, it seems like, you have the mayor's race, you have Bonin, you have Villanueva. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on from what you see?
Sure. Well, there's been a kind of an anti-Bonin movement since the road diet episode, which you may recall a few years ago, when some key arterials in the west side were designated as road diets, and they had lanes cut off to slow down traffic, and that caused an uproar. But what's happened at the shelter has created a movement to recall Bonin, which is kind of it's a little bit of political show. I mean, a recall election, even if one occurs, would be in the spring, just before the regular election. So whether it's going to go that far is unclear. But there is a movement, and people are trying to recall Bonin. Meanwhile, there are other groups who have been dissatisfied with him in how he's dealt with the homelessness in Venice, and they've actually been having regular meetings with the city's Recreation and Parks Department, with the police, and with Bonan's office, and Sheila Kuehl has been involved to some extent, and also the mayor's homelessness crisis task force has been involved. And so somehow together they've come up with this plan to try to break the boardwalk into zones and little by little get people into housing. And that group of people, there's a lot of dissatisfaction with the council office, but they're trying to work with the city, and they have now been staffing what they call a housing connect center, which is a 4 or 5 tables under tents at Rose Avenue on the boardwalk, and they're trying to get people to come and talk to them and find out what their circumstances are, their health needs, their housing needs, their income, trying to get them ready to be able to accept housing when it becomes available. And so at some point that's going to move from the information gathering stage to the action stage, where they will try to start actually moving people off the boardwalk. It's just, again, it's unclear when that transition would occur.
Right. So are you seeing that? So, okay. So now I think we haven't discussed Villanueva. Can you explain a little bit about how he comes into play and what he's doing?
Sure. And I have to say, I haven't been over to the boardwalk since last week. So the situation is so dynamic that you don't want to say that this is the way it is when you haven't been there for a few days. But,
no worries. But I saw you put out some reporting on it. I guess just from what you know, you probably have access to a lot of records and things, and
sure.
People reporting back.
So the sheriff he's doing some grandstanding and trying to get involved in this narrative as well. But he did something that I think was politically fairly astute. He sent the sheriff's homeless team, about 20 officers, and they just talked to people and tried to convince a few people to get shelter. And I know the head of that team. His name is Lieutenant Jeffrey Diedrich, and I've driven with him in a Polaris in the San Gabriel River, and he's a empathetic guy. It was a good pick to choose him. But there's been some controversy. They convinced an elderly man who had some health issues and was a naval veteran to go to the VA. And there were some hiccups in the handoff, and the guy showed up back at the boardwalk the next day and said that he had been lied to, and that got some publicity. Well, subsequent to that, he ended up at the Bridge Home Shelter on Main Street, where the last I've heard he is there now. But it was like everything that happens, it wasn't a clear result one way or the other. Right.
Yeah, and I believe that was originally reported on by Kate Cagle, who was down there and just found this man, which is an extraordinary story. Definitely highlights the difficulty that it when it comes to helping individuals get into housing, into temporary shelter, and how you can't just remove somebody from their home and expect that that's going to immediately solve the problem. So I think we're seeing play out maybe a bit of what the sheriff's department didn't plan for, which is the blowback of you can take somebody to a temporary shelter, but doesn't mean they're going to stay there. And then the guy shows up the next day. So it's a lot of different variables that come into play when individuals need to get into housing.
Yeah, absolutely. I was there when the gentleman left, and he had a great deal of distress about his property. And you and I would look at his property and say it wasn't worth any. Most of it was just trash. In fact, one of the sheriff's deputies picked up a couple of his blankets, which you could smell urine in the blankets, but he was just like, he didn't want to give up his blankets. And it was just, it was traumatic, even though he left voluntarily and he left in the hands of a fellow veteran who you could tell had his interest at heart, but it was just a traumatic situation, and one that you predictably there would be failures along the way, which happened. Apparently, the story that I heard, and it's not a definitive story, is that when he got to the VA, he declined to go into a shelter there. And will we ever know exactly what happened? Who knows?
Right. So I guess, can you maybe summarize, or I'm happy to as well, but like what you're seeing from the activist groups as well, like Street Watch and those individuals who are typically on the scene very fast when it comes to big public events like this with evicting homeless individuals?
Well, sure. I mean, in the case of Echo Park, as I'm sure you recall, the Street Watch, Ground Game, and other groups conducted what you would call a civil disobedience. They were there and they tried to obstruct the clearing of the park, and that led to a lot of arrests. What I saw on the boardwalk was something a little different. They were there and they were filming, they were making videos, and they gave statements and criticized the activities of the sheriff, and are demanding full housing rights for everybody on the boardwalk. But
Yeah.
I didn't see that rise to the level of civil disobedience, of which, I mean, the other thing about the boardwalk that makes it different is that it's a mile long. And I'm kind of an old guy, and my legs got tired walking back and forth, trying to
Yeah.
see everything at once. And so you could be at one end of the boardwalk and something could be happening at the other end, and you would have no idea.
Right.
So it's very hard to give a definitive description of what Street Watch did or didn't do, but it appeared to me that it was a more it was crafted to be more of a public statement as opposed to an action.
I see what you're saying, and so now between now and I don't know if we covered this, but Sheriff Villanueva made a proclamation that he would clean or clear or evict the homeless individuals by July 4th. Is that accurate? I believe that was the statement.
It's accurate that he made some kind of a statement like that. I have not actually heard the statement, and I've heard different interpretations of it.
Okay.
But it's pretty clear, I think, that he is going to try to cause something to happen early next month. I guess that's the best way I could summarize it. We haven't been back. We're going to go back this week and try to catch up and see how the sheriff's action has evolved. I don't imagine it's going to be all 18 deputies every day.
Sure.
But we don't know at this point.
So do you not see the same level, though, of, I guess, protesters showing up, resistance to the law enforcement being present like you did in Echo Park Lake, or do you see it sort of getting and escalating to that level? I guess we can't predict the future, but
I can't predict the future, but you can see some clear differences. What happened in Echo Park is that Councilman O'Farrell said he was going to clean the park. He said he was going to close it, and it was clear that it was going to be an action, but he wouldn't say when it was going to occur. And then we could just tell in the last week the tension increased and the outreach got more sort of intense. But it was clear that it was going to be something that was going to occur on one day, and with that buildup of tension. And I think that what's been happening in Venice is that other than Villanueva's statement that seems to be giving some kind of a deadline, The action that the city is taking is it isn't geared to a specific time, and nothing has really happened yet on a large scale. There have been some smaller cleanups to open the handball courts and the skating park, but it's still a question of like what's going to happen and when. And so there isn't something for those groups to sort of come out and try to prevent at this point.
Mm-hmm. And we've seen a lot of very public events. Joe Buscaino, having a campaign rally at Venice Beach with some, I believe they were a Venice homeowners group with him. But I'm curious to know, do you have any sense of what the overall sort of polling or homeowner of that region of population feels about what we do with homeless individuals in the area? Because I do think that Venice is a largely, or at least it has been viewed as a largely very progressive cluster of the city. And so I'm curious to know like how they feel about Villanueva. I've seen different people in the news, but I just don't know what that truly represents of the neighborhood.
I'm not aware of any polling.
Yeah.
And I think that even if there were polling, you would have to look at a small section of Venice west of Highway 1. There are homeless camps and issues east of Highway 1, but it's just
Yes.
much more like anywhere else on the west side. And there is so much noise right now, and people are creating noise who are know how to do that. They know how to manipulate social media, and they know how to write their councilman, and they know how to create the impression that lots of people are writing the councilman. I suspect that in that small area, there is a strong sentiment that the situation has gotten out of control. But that's not scientific, and I don't really know how to gauge
Right.
the broader. If you have to drive down Rose to get to the boardwalk, at least from the north side where I would come from. And life on Rose looks like pretty normal, and people are casual and relaxed, and it can just change. If you go one more block on Rose, you hit to Third or Hampton Street, and suddenly everything changes. And so, there are probably lots of people in there that don't see it as such a big problem, but then they don't make noise.
Right. Yes. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. And people have been comparing it to a beachfront Skid Row. Now, in terms of empirical data, do you have any sense of how many homeless individuals there are on the boardwalk currently?
St. Joseph Center, which is the social services agency, which is just like 2 or 3 blocks from Rose on Hampton, did a survey recently, the last 2 or 3 weeks, and came up with the number 167 people. The homeowners have been doing some of the. By the way, there are just groups forming in Venice. You can't even keep up with them. So many groups are forming, but I've been in touch with some of them, and they've done their own counts, and they estimated a couple hundred tents. And it's not unusual to have more tents than people, because people will set up 2 or 3 tents to store things, and so somewhere in that range of 150 is probably not unreasonable.
So at the end of the day, we're still talking about not the same scope or size as an area like Skid Row, which has a few thousand.
The last point in time count, which was conducted in 2020, found I believe 1,600 in Venice, but that was, again, I believe was larger Venice.
Okay.
And I haven't I asked people if that number was credible, and most of the people I've spoken to thought it was, and they think it's increased since then to about 2,000, which would make it second only to Skid Row.
Okay. That's
Hollywood being a
interesting.
close third,
Right.
but but it isn't like Skid Row for many reasons. I mean, it's uh, geographically Skid Row is larger, and then these areas of tents in Venice, and Skid Row is a much more homogeneous community. You have lots of retail on Skid Row, so it sort of verges into the fashion district, but you don't have uh, you don't have a lot of people living right in the middle of Skid Row. You don't have shops that bring people from all over the city, from all over the country even. So Venice is really unique in that way that
Hmm.
uh,
I
it's
understand.
just like this meeting place of very intimate, where people are just like right up against each other. People walking
Right.
down the boardwalk, they bump into each other. Just it's uh, and that's kind of a unique environment in Los Angeles.
No, that's a very interesting case study for the sort of different approaches to addressing it, because there's a difference between when it's in your backyard, how people feel about it, versus
Yeah.
when it's in an area like Skid Row, where it's controlled largely by different agencies and supportive organizations. How much shelter support and housing and additional service organizations are available to these individuals? Is there enough to support those on the boardwalk? What is currently kind of I guess the action plan? And we know Villanueva said that he's coming in there and taking people out. So what's going on with his side and what's going on with the Bonin side?
Well, I can't speak really historically because we only started spending a lot of time in Venice about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and we've always seen LASA casework outreach workers out there talking to people. It's been unclear exactly what they do. They hand out food, but what they've done in terms of finding placements for people, that's not that clear. Then in the last week, there's been this huge increase in outreach, and St. Joseph had people. I mean, I'm in St. Joseph outreach workers that I had met in South Los Angeles 2 years ago. So St. Joseph has put a big push on there
Mm.
recently, and but again, it hasn't moved necessarily into the placements phase. And the people we've talked to have been in meetings with the city say that one of the surprises that they've had is how few beds are available at any time,
Mm.
maybe 10, 20 available. And so they recognize that it could be a slow process.
Wow. Sounds like it's going to be quite a complicated situation for the weeks to come, or the summer. If Villanueva proclaims July 4th and it doesn't really happen, what do you see happening with the residents? And I guess if you could uh, take from the Echo Park Lake experience, like, do you think that the city is doing this slightly differently? Do they have a different approach to prevent those types of outpourings? And I don't know if there was really anything to do differently, but Urban Alchemy was a big part of that, and they were providing Project Room Key vouchers to those individuals. Do you see that kind of action currently happening? Is that what LASA is already doing? Like, are they giving them vouchers if they ask for it?
Another big difference with Echo Park was that the city had uh, leased the LA Grand Hotel downtown for
Yeah.
Project Room Key, which had a capacity of more than 450 um, rooms. And
Right.
earlier in the year, the city was phasing that out. As a lot of Project Room Key was being phased out because there was concern about the end of federal reimbursement.
Right.
And then slightly before the Echo Park action, the city renewed its lease with the LA Grand, and there was a huge capacity there because they had been cutting down the number of people there. So there was this one place that you could take 200 people. I think 188. They didn't all go to the LA Grand, but a large portion of them did. And that doesn't exist right now in Venice. So
you mentioned the Ramada Inn. Is that up in play?
35 rooms, and a lawsuit has been filed to block it. I don't know how that's going to play out, but it isn't open yet.
Interesting. I remember hearing about a proposal that was very widely criticized, and that I think was prior to this recent wave of Villanueva's actions. But can you go into some explanation of it about building these tiny home villages, the Pallet shelter communities? I believe there was discussion of building them in the boardwalk.
Councilman Bonin proposed using some other parks, Will Rogers State Beach and Dockweiler Beach, and somewhere in Westchester for various kinds of shelters. And of course, those proposals, which are still being considered by the city, generated huge opposition from those communities. And in fact, that was sort of the thing that catapulted Venice into being the symbol of what you don't want your community to become. It just those proposals just touched off this narrative, like, don't make us don't turn us into Venice.
And is the opposition to it like a fear that we're incentivizing more homeless individuals to come to Venice, or is the idea that this doesn't solve because of my understanding of it is that these temporary shelters are a tent replacement, and that there's more monitoring going on, and that there's a bit of structure to it. And so why was there opposition as far as you saw?
I mean, these motivations are quite complex. And if you ask any two people why they oppose something, the answer might be different. But
yeah,
these are communities that, what they see happening in Venice horrifies them, and they don't want to see something. I mean, they're taking the example of the Abridged Home Shelter that just all these problems ballooned around it. They, who would want that near them? It's a pretty visceral reaction.
Sure. Yeah. I would love to know how we can, like, where the data is about, do these temporary homes being built where there's already an existing encampment slow down the levels of, I guess, criminal behavior that people are afraid of? Like, building a pallet shelter stop, the rise in the crime that we're seeing on Instagram and social media feeds, being replayed over and over? So I just wonder, like, why oppose something that might provide a solution, and why not look for a solution when there currently is no ability to house these individuals?
2 or 3 of these have been opened in the San Fernando Valley now, and you make a good point. We need to look and see how those have interacted with the communities around them.
Right, because my understanding is that they're in large areas that already had encampments. So one of them, I think that there was already, like, one of the most recent ones, the North Hollywood one, there was a huge encampment around it, and there was talks about it not becoming a special enforcement zone, and like, kind of, I just remember hearing that that was already Street Watch was ready to jump on that, and maybe for good reason, but yeah, to that point, it's like, it's also a very new solution too, so there's not a lot of data about these pallet shelters. But my understanding is that a pallet shelter, compared to building affordable housing from the ground up, can can be placed on the ground and developed in like days. So I wonder.
Not true in the city of Los Angeles. It took months
Okay.
because of the way that, I mean, you, in theory, it can be done. Redondo Beach built a
In
pallet
theory, yeah.
shelter, and they did it like, as you say, in days. And the city Public Works Department, it was on a lot that had a slight slope in it, and they made wood shims to put under them to level the
Yeah.
sheds. But in the city of Los Angeles, they regraded the whole thing. They put in underground plumbing. They put in concrete, slabs for each, and so that takes time and
millions
costs
of
money.
dollars.
Yeah.
But I've seen that, and I've seen that. So that versus room key, though, those are the two fast solutions that we have right now to provide new housing where there's new housing needed, or there's new temporary housing. Because each one, like purchasing a room key site, that again, that can be done fairly quickly. In the grand scheme of things, these are a lot faster. Are we just taking these individuals from Venice right now? Essentially, the only solution available would be to take them to other parts of the city? I guess that's the question. And then I'll wrap it up.
Yeah. I think that's really unclear. I mean, the shared housing, for example, is an individual, and Bonin is counting on somewhere up to 100 placements in shared housing, and that can be in a home. Those are single family homes that share leases all around the city, so those could be anywhere. I think they tend to be on the west side because Share is based in Culver City, but they could be anywhere. And yeah, they could be shelter placements in the valley. That's possible. And I think the point you're making is accurate, that we're sort of experimenting and trying things out on the fly. And we're also talking about open camping sites, and there is one at the Veterans Administration. And these are all sort of experimental. Let's just try this and see what happens. And I mean, while I'm spending 3 weeks out in Venice, things are going on elsewhere in the city, and I'm not. I'm not at the shelter in North Hollywood to see the Pallet shelter to see how that's working out. But I've got to make some trips out there. But this is a complex problem, and it's diffused all over the city. It's very hard to cover it.
Yeah, I'd imagine. And but your coverage is a valuable source of keeping individuals in the city up to date on what's going on, what we can do about it, and I guess the reality of what's on the ground. So we're very grateful to have you, Doug, and thank you for just doing an excellent job with coverage of the unhoused crisis in LA.
I do the best I can. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Doug, for your time.
Sure.
That was Doug Smith from Los Angeles Times.